correct and to get accurate information. And the general public doesn't have either the means or the time to find out for themselves. It's hard to even find a place to research this unless you know something about it. So most people who are not directly involved with the immigration milieu don't have the basic facts. And unfortunately, we hear a lot of phraseology that's incorrect. And I want to start off with the term alien. There's nothing derogatory about the term. Immigration is controlled by Title 8 of the U.S. Code. And if you pick up a copy of Title 8, on the outside of the law book, it says aliens and nationality. That's the title of the law. An alien is very simply anybody who's not a U.S. citizen or national. Now, a U.S. national is somebody from American Samoa, and there's no real difference between U.S. nationals and U.S. citizens. So for our purposes, we'll say anybody who's not a citizen is an alien. Now, some aliens are here as non-immigrants in legal status. Some of them are here as immigrants, and the only proper use of the term immigrant is somebody who's lawfully admitted permanent resident, meaning they can live here for as long as they want, they can work, they can do anything a U.S. citizen can do except for two things. They can't hold public office and they can't vote.
Why do you think both governmental officials and the media sort of, let's use the term, pervert the terminology. Why do you think they massage the terms?
Well, I think there's two reasons: ignorance and design. And I think some of the media people are just ignorant of the correct terms. They use the term undocumented immigrant. To begin with, an immigrant is very well documented. If you come here as an immigrant, you have to provide a lot of documentation. So nowhere does the word undocumented appear in immigration law at all. And we have politicians saying undocumented immigrant, undocumented worker. I've even heard media and politicians say undocumented citizen, which is completely ridiculous. Why would an undocumented citizen be? So the words become frequently used, and we have a Supreme Court justice who finds the term illegal alien offensive, Justice Sotomayor. That's her right as a private citizen to find it offensive, but she can't change the law, regardless of her position in the government. Only Congress can.
I think part of the issue is that words end up being used by one side pejoratively, and they acquire a meaning that they didn't intend in the eyes of the law. And then people on the other side will sometimes shift to something else because they're trying not to cause offense.
Well, I'm going to give you a term that I like to use, and it's more inclusive than illegal alien. It's more accurate. It's deportable alien, because not everybody who's deportable starts out as an illegal alien. And there are two types of illegal aliens. There are people who cross the border without inspection, and they're smuggled in or they cross on their own. And then there are people who enter with a visa, and they either overstay the visa or they work without authorization. And there are other means of violating your terms of admission. So,
well, that makes sense, deportable alien.
Yeah, a deportable alien could be a person who's here legally. Now, I'd say about 40% of the people we arrested in Rhode Island were resident aliens who were here legally, who could work and live here indefinitely, but they'd been convicted of various crimes which rendered them deportable.
In our private conversations, you've talked about the notion that there's really an entire criminal class that has come here, both legally and illegally, to become criminal enterprises. Tell us more about that. What's your personal experience with that?
My personal experience is, first of all, there's no particular nationality or ethnicity that dominates in that. Just about every single group you can think of has their own version of organized crime. And we think organized crime like watching The Sopranos, but there's Albanian organized crime, there's Israeli organized crime, there's Colombian drug cartels, there's Mexican drug cartels, there's Dominican organized crime in the drug area.
So while certain groups would have you think that this is the mission to clean up this problem is racist and targeted at one community, primarily the Hispanic community, that couldn't be further from the truth.
No, it couldn't be. And here's the interesting thing. When I was in the Border Patrol, about 45% of my class were Hispanic. Because you got extra points on the entry exam if you were fluent in Spanish. Now, I got the 15 extra points, and I'm not Hispanic, but I knew enough Spanish to get it. Now, a lot of people were hired by the INS who were born abroad. And one of the reasons that they're drawn, well, now it's called ICE, but back then, I retired in 96, and ICE hadn't been formed yet. And a lot of the people are on the job. We had probably the highest percentage of agents born in other countries than any other agency, and that's because their language skills came in very handy.
And the cultural skills, I would think, as well.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And being able to actually tell the difference between someone who's dangerous and someone who just shouldn't be where they are.
That and the whole idea that this is an ethnically based enforcement is wrong. I don't believe it's ethnically enforced. I believe that a lot of the uproar in the public is ethnically based, which is a different story. You see, I would say the Mexicans predominate across the country in the sheer number of people,
right,
because it's easy for them to come in here. But
yeah, absolutely, and they have good motivation as well because they can make more money here.
Right. Now there's a sea change that took place before I even went on the job. I went on in 76, and at one time there used to be kind of an ebb and flow of migrant labor from Mexico and then back and forth between there and the United States. And what started to happen is people started bringing their families here and settling,
right,
and they weren't going back. And one of the fallacies is that, we have to control the border, but the fact is that most people who enter the United States illegally don't stay in the border area. They're pipelined right up to places where they can get employment.
Right.
Chicago is one of the main destinations in the country for Mexicans. Why? Because there was a very large legal Mexican-American population in Chicago. People don't realize that. They think of L.A., but Chicago, going back 100 years, has had Mexicans there who were drawn by industry.
It's always been my contention that there is a strong movement amongst I'll call it the legal aliens here in the United States to maintain the status quo, because many of them, in a sense, control the economic pipeline for those people here illegally. I look at the variety of businesses, whether it be communications, telecommunications, money changing, local off-the-books labor, things like that. It's always been ironic to me that the people who control that and truly keep a lot of these people in the shadows, are in fact from the same ethnic groups. What's your experience?
Absolutely. I don't care if you're talking about Poles or Yugoslavs or Mexicans or East Indians or Africans, Filipinos. It just doesn't matter. People are going to innately trust people who speak their language, share their culture, and unfortunately are ready to rip them off on a moment's notice. And for instance, in this area, in 1985, we broke up a smuggling operation that brought in about 10,000 Guatemalans to the southern New England area over a 12-year period. And what they were doing was the two guys running it, right off Althea Street, they owned a bus company down in Guatemala City. They would load up these buses with Guatemalans, drive them up to the border area, turn them over to Mexican coyotes who were smugglers. They'd stage them in a drop house on the Mexican side. They'd move them over to a drop house on the American side. Then they would get contract 18-wheeler drivers who were hauling mail for the U.S. Post Office. And they'd put these people in the sleeper cabs of the vehicles. So they wouldn't be able to put them in the box because those are sealed trucks. And postal inspectors don't give anybody much leeway when it comes to those trucks. You can't have a broken seal. So they put 4 or 5 or 6 people in the sleeper cab.
Wow.
And they drive them up to Fort Worth and put them on an airplane. They fly up to Logan, and they get picked up at Logan and driven down to Rhode Island. And we took this down. We infiltrated it with undercover agents, and we took the operation down all the way from Guatemala right up through here. We indicted, I think, 13 people.
What's remarkable about your career is you've seen firsthand all the results of illegal immigration. What are the for the Guatemalan, for example, in the case that you just cited, what type of living standard do they have while they're going through this process? I've got to imagine you've seen some real brutality.
Well, sometimes you have, like particularly in Chicago, much more than here, you'd have people, 15, 16 guys living in an apartment with 8 beds. They take turns sleep. They sleep in 2 shifts on the same beds. Frequently restaurant workers that were hauled in just like property, and they were living in really filthy conditions. And on a very large number of them we discovered were taking medication for tuberculosis because, the bacteria, I guess, is endemic in some areas, but it doesn't really hit them until they get a good winter in a cold climate. And, think about that. You got hundreds and hundreds of restaurants in the Chicago area having people who are food handlers and they've got active TB.
Yeah, and during the 90s, there was a significant crackdown on human trafficking from China, from inland China, of restaurant workers who would live in similarly squalid conditions and would work in food handling in restaurants all over New York City. And in fact, boats were busted and essentially freighters who were carrying in, like freight, human cargo. Well,
the biggest smuggling case I worked on in Illinois didn't involve Latinos at all. It involved white Europeans, and it was people from Kosovo. Now, you're talking 1982, 83. This is well before Kosovo became an independence issue that the world recognized, but they had an independence movement going on even back then. We had Yugoslavs who were Kosovar origin, which are ethnic Albanians, and they were bringing people in from Mexico through the southern border. And again, we infiltrated the operation. I think we took down about 16 principals. And what we discovered were 137 drop locations in the area of Wisconsin, Iowa, and Illinois, northern Illinois. And they were all restaurants. And they were working these guys as slave labor to pay off their trip. So, we're talking how many years ago? 30 years ago, more than 30 years ago, there were people trying to work off $6,000 and $7,000 smuggling fees. So they didn't get paid until they worked that off. And what they were doing, they were buying arms and smuggling those back into the Kosovo region, preparing for a separatist revolt from the Yugoslavs. The job is certainly not boring. We dealt with all kinds of operations, and even the drug operations here in Rhode Island. Everybody was getting involved. At one point in time, Colombians tended to control cocaine, Dominicans tended to control heroin, but then you had Nigerians who were wholesaling heroin that had been brought into the U.S. by body carriers on aircraft. And after we worked hand in glove with the police departments here. That's changed radically, I guess. But we had a very close relationship. I spent 4 years on the Providence Police full-time, and we were really doing some damage to these drug houses run by Dominicans in Providence. And what they did was they started hiring Guatemalans to work in the drug houses. The new guy on the block that gets to take the heat. And the funniest thing about the Guatemalans is we'd lock them up, and they'd have pay stubs from the Ames warehouse up in Mansfield. They'll make a minimum wage, and then they'd run a drug house, and they're making $1,000 a night. So why are you working in a warehouse? Well, we have to have something to do during the day.
that both in Massachusetts and Rhode Island, where you had state police and local police working hand in hand with, for lack of a better term, I'll call it the federales. What does that cost America in terms of both security and the efficiency of law enforcement?
Well, I retired 17 years ago, and at the time I retired, we had a great relationship. It was mutually beneficial. It enhanced public safety a great deal, and I think it's deteriorated. Look at the case of Marco Reese, where the police weren't able to notify ICE, and this guy went out and kidnapped a woman and raped her. And, see, he in days past, he would have been bagged right there at the police station by the INS agent assigned to the police department.
And
we
yet,
had a full-time agent there all the time.
And yet, as a result of that, there's a real human cost. And also, coincidentally, it seems to have disappeared off the radar.
Well, this concept of sanctuary city, it's very foolhardy. The INS